Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Understable Discourse. Hopefully, your soon-to-be go-to place for all the stats and analysis in the game of disc golf. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the recap for the Open at Austin that happened this past weekend. We're going to be talking about the infamous Hole 18 at Sprinkle Valley, so don't you worry, we're going to get into that pretty deep. But we're also going to look at some season stats so far and do a small preview for the Go Throw Stop number 2 at Permission Ridge. So, getting into the Open at Austin, first of all, is the MVP's Open at Austin. It is kind of weird hearing something that isn't the MVP Open because we all kind of associate that with Maple Hill in Massachusetts, but this is the MVP's Open at Austin, and this is going to be our first Elite Plus event for the year, which means we have 4 rounds. Obviously, we talked about this last week. The first and second round were held at Sprinkle Valley, and the third and fourth round were held at the Harvey Penick course. Now, looking at Sprinkle Valley, at first glance, like we talked about, the course was pretty well maintained, and the fairways were cut very excellently. When you watch the practice round, hopefully you all watched the practice round that Paul Macbeth and Ricky put out. Paul mentioned that you could smell fresh cut wood while on the greens when they were putting, so it had just been recently done. They looked like they really took good care of the course, and they were trying to be very, very intentional about their course design, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So we also knew that the course was going to be a bit tougher, especially for the FPO. We called that out because last year, this is the host site for the USWDGC, that's the United States Women's Disc Golf Championship, but this is the first time the MPO ever seen this track before, so it was very interesting to see what was going to happen on the course, and the numbers tell a story for sure. But the course really makes gap hitting and angle control a premium. You know, you've got to be able to push your disc through gaps, make some decisions about whether you want to play the forehand, the backhand, and definitely put some pressure on shots. And I think it was a nice compliment to last weekend being at Waco and you know, Brazos East with the Beast, and now we're here on this course. Especially, it complements itself really well with what we're going to see at Harvey Penick. For the MPO field, Sprinkle Valley actually came out to average 1.99 strokes under par for them, and that puts it as the second hardest course that the MPO has played this year. Obviously, Olympus was the hardest course, and Brazos East was the easiest, so this kind of puts this in that happy medium, erring on a little bit of a harder side, because anything that's under 2 strokes under par, that's still pretty tough for the MPO field, because that's a lot of, you know, guys near the bottom kind of bringing those top guys down, but that's just kind of how the stats roll out when you have so many people in the field. But the course played pretty fair, averaging a 37% birdie rate across the entire field, and the holes that looked to be the easiest for the MPO field specifically were holes 6 and 10, averaging close to half a stroke under par and had birdie rates of over 50%. Honestly, there really, from a course perspective, isn't too much to talk about when it comes to the MPO's play of Sprinkle Valley, except for hole 18, and we're going to cover that in more detail here in a little bit. So rather than kind of dive deep into what was pretty fair and consistent play across the course, we're going to talk about just a few notable shout-outs. First of all, hole 1 was eagled by Gavin Babcock, and I don't know if you could really do justice without having watched the event, but hole 1 at Sprinkle Valley was definitely, for almost everybody, a layup to a landing zone and then a second shot that pushes through the woods. And he threw something that actually got him to 49 feet from the basket in C2, and he nailed that putt, getting himself the only eagle on the weekend. I'm sure there are plenty of other players who maybe tried, because there were definitely players who could have reached that, but to execute that shot and get to a point where you had the putt and then hit the putt, just pretty phenomenal stuff from Gavin Babcock. Next, you've got hole 8, which was aced by Albert Tom. Always fun to see the bazooka blow the basket up with an ace. And hole 9 was another one of those holes that was supposed to be a 2-shot hole, but 2 guys decided to eagle that, and that's Cole Radalin and Aaron Gossage, because off of the tee, this hole had a really hard dog leg straight out and then up to the left. Off the tee, there was a gap in the sky you could have taken, and I guess it worked out for the 2 of them, because carding an eagle on that hole was pretty impressive. But speaking impressive, we have to talk about hole 17, which is the little island hole with the antlers in front of the drop zone you go to. But that hole was actually aced twice. Once by Alden Harris, who I swear, I don't know about you, it feels like Alden Harris is picking up aces just about everywhere, or he has these crazy long throw-ins. It's just something that he's particularly skilled at. But then also Gavin Phillips got that one as well. Moving over to the FPO, as expected, this course proved to be very difficult for them. Sprinkle Valley is now the hardest course FPO has likely ever played on tour. And before you really say that's all because of hole 18, if you take hole 18 away, it still averaged 6 strokes over par, putting it in the upper echelon of the hardest this year, and potentially one of the hardest ones the FPO's ever seen. So just taking away 18 and you still have a really hard track at 18, and it feels almost blisteringly impossible, to the tune of 9.57 strokes on average over par. That means that the average player came out of day 2 already at 18 over for the event. That's insane to think about on the Pro Tour nowadays. And I'm sure, we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but the FPO was definitely feeling the pain from that one. There was only one hole that actually averaged under par both days, and that was hole 10, which pretty much was the easiest hole on course, and we saw that on the MPO side as well. It's a 290-foot shot, kind of downhill a little bit. A pretty open and doable hole. Par should come pretty easy to everybody, but that was the one that averaged under par both days, but not very much under par for the FPO field. That was also a fun shot because you were able to post up kind of at the brewery there and watch players throw down that fairway. It was a really cool setup they had at Sprinkle Valley for that. Now, what made the course so hard, specifically for the FPO? Number one, that the birdies came at a premium for them. The highest birdie rate on any hole for the FPO field was 25%. Here's why. It's because getting parked was nearly impossible. The highest park percentage on any one hole was only 9%. That's insane. And the average parked percentage across both rounds was 2% per hole, which means statistically, nobody was putting themselves into an easy position to get birdies. I'm flabbergasted. I thought for sure that the FPO would perform a little bit better there. I mean, we know last year from the USWDGC that it was a hard track for them already, but I would have expected a little bit higher level play. And it just was not their day, not their weekend. C1 was also a very rare thing. An average of 15% C1 regulation was held across both rounds. Even getting into Circle 1, having a birdie putt from inside 33 feet seemed almost impossible throughout the first 2 days of the event. Hole 18. Yep, we're here. Honestly, probably one of the biggest stories that I've seen resonate from a tournament in a good long while. And I think we're going to be looking back at this story for most of the season. It's definitely going to be on my list of top stories that have happened in 2025. So let's get into hole 18 a little bit. Let's start by looking at the hole itself. It was a par 5 for both divisions, and it was 900 feet for the MPO and 780 feet for the FPO. Both positions teed from an out-of-bounds place to a pretty generous landing zone. There was some wind, obviously. Each day had its own difficulty with the wind, but the initial landing zone off the tee was pretty generous for both the MPO and the FPO. And quite frankly, just because the MPO tee was about 120 feet back, they were landing in the same places that the FPO drives were, so it kind of equaled the hole out and put people on a level playing field pretty quickly. And then the fairway of the hole itself kind of slopes a little bit downhill from the left to the right, but not significantly that it would cause any major issue. One of the difficult shots on the hole is definitely the second shot. The second shot was where you kind of had to make a decision and navigate over a small portion of the fairway that was considered OB into an area that was guarded by trees at several different places to a landing zone in front of a set of stairs. This shot was very critical because depending on where you landed, it set you up or didn't set you up for the most pivotal shot on the hole, and most times a lot of players found themselves landing off their second shot and having to pitch to an area of safety as opposed to trying to get aggressive on the hole because they just weren't in position to be able to do so. So you make it to this landing area, or you land somewhere in the trees and you pitch up to the ideal landing area. You now find yourself near the base of the steps in the fairway, putting you roughly 150 to 180 feet from the green itself. It's OB the whole way from this shot to the green. You have 7 feet of elevation from the bottom of the stairs to where the green is located, and if you don't come to rest on the island or fly over the island, you're going to have to rethrow from where you were last in bounds. So, stroke and distance. Now, there was a caveat that if it happened 4 times, you got to go to the drop zone, but obviously if that happened 4 times, you're already in a really, really rough spot. If you were fortunate enough to fly over the green on any of those shots, you were able to also advance to a drop zone at the back of the green. The green itself was 40 feet wide by 45 feet deep, with the basket placed 10 feet from the front of the green. So when you had that drop zone putt, which was at the 35-foot mark, facing back towards the basket, you kind of had yourself a very natural death putt being set up. Scoring-wise, for the MPO, this was the hardest hole that we've had all year. Not surprised to see that at all. It averaged a 1.01 strokes over par in round 1 and 1.36 strokes over par in round 2. That's probably because on round 2 there was a bit of a headwind, and at times it was also right to left, making the tee shot a bit more difficult and part of the second shot a bit more difficult. So that makes sense to see that go up a little bit. Also, this is the closest hole that we've seen this year in difficulty to this hole was hole 16 in round 1 at Olympus, averaging 0.7 strokes over par. So in round 2, this hole was twice as difficult, essentially, compared to par, as the next hardest hole that they have played this year. Here's an interesting stat for you. This was the only time that a single hole averaged a harder round score to par in the last 5 years was hole 12 at Northwood Black, averaging 1.41 strokes over par back in 2023. Otherwise, this hole, it stands at the top. And if you average the 2 rounds together, it comes out to 0.01 strokes over par greater than last year's most difficult hole at New London with hole 6. So already we see this hole standing atop as the most difficult hole that the MPO has likely played in the last 5 years. For the FPO side, it's not a question of is this the hardest hole that they've played in the last 5 years. And once again, I want to reiterate, when I say hardest, I mean comparatively to par. Skill-wise, there are more difficult holes, obviously. But when you compare it to par, this is kind of what we're looking at when I say hardest or most difficult. There's no question if this is the hardest in the last 5 years. The question is actually, is this the hardest hole that FPO has ever played? Ever. It averaged 2.81 strokes over par in round 1 and a staggering 3.55 strokes over par in round 2. In the last 5 years, not a single hole the FPO have played on tour has averaged over 2 strokes over par in a single round. And this thing did it twice, 2 days in a row. We've never seen a hole this brutal for the FPO division before. There were a total of 175 out of bounds strokes between both those rounds, and if you average that out, that's an average of 1.65 OB strokes per player over the 2 rounds. That's nuts. And you may be saying to yourself, hey Gary, obviously there are going to be people who are at the bottom level of skill in these divisions who are driving up these averages and making it difficult for us to see what a realistic number would be. But funny you should say that, because here's some notable scores. The best in the world right now, Kristen Lott. She scored an 11 in round 1 and a 10 in round 2. Calvin Heimberg, arguably one of the most consistent players we've seen in the last 5 years on tour, he got a 12 in round 1. Now, he cleaned it up with a birdie in round 2, but he still got a 12 in round 1. And there are plenty of other top FPO and skilled MPO who got double and triple bogeys and some double digits on this hole. So this isn't a matter of just the bottom of the field dragging the top down. This hole hit everyone one way or another. And I'd be remiss to not take a moment to also call out the really exceptional scoring that happened on the hole. If I'm going to say who didn't do well, I got to at least say who played the hole really well. For the MPO field across both days, obviously a larger division, they had 34 total birdies across everyone, and there were 4 people who were the ones who birdied at both rounds. That, if you look at the field and how it played the hole, super impressive to have accomplished the birdie on this hole 2 days in a row. And that feat was accomplished by Ezra Robinson, Jason Lawson, KJ USA, Mr. Kevin Jones himself, and Kyle Klein. In the FPO division, we saw a total of 5 birdies in the entire FPO field for both rounds together. And that was done by Rebecca Cox, Evelina Salonen, Heidi Lani, Kat Murch, and Chantel Badinsky, aka Miss Frisbees. Those 5 birdies are unbelievably impressive, considering that in the second round, or the first round, that's almost 4 strokes better than the average, and in the third round, that's like almost 5 strokes better than the average. It's just insane to think about. Before I move on to how people finished at the event, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about hole 18, because when you have something that's this significant, especially when you look at the statistics on this hole, how this played out, the conversation that happened afterwards, it would be an absolute miss on the mark for me to not take time to discuss hole 18 and what some of the effects it may have on the FPO field and general course design in the future. After the rounds were over, we saw a very mixed bag reaction from the pros and the general disc golf community. I'll try to summarize it for you. Basically, most of the FPO competitors, they hated this hole. Absolutely hated this hole. We saw players who were crying on hole 18, who were leaving the course absolutely furious. There were people who were saying that there were pros who were leaving it just cursing left and right about the hole. One thing that makes it very clear and obvious how people felt about it, especially the pros, is if you watch Jomez Pro and you're watching the FPO coverage, you got Madison Walker and Erica Stinchcomb who were on the commentary, and they were very vocal about how they felt about the hole itself. They had no problem saying very bluntly that it was designed horribly. They said they hoped that something like this would never happen again. And if you want to lose a drinking game really quickly, go back and take a drink every single time they reference the fact that the OB line is close to the bullseye. I mean, it is just the level of disdain they had for the hole was palpable. It was actually slightly uncomfortable to watch, with just how much their comments were more uncomfortable than watching the players play the hole. The fans, though, have been a bit split down the middle. I would say that there's 2 major groupings that you have here. The first handful are the ones that think it should have been made a lot easier, that we shouldn't be doing this kind of thing to the FPO field, and that any hole that would average scores this high clearly has something wrong with it. And then you have the other half of the aisle saying, you're a pro. You're supposedly the best player in the world. Just go get good. And so you got these 2 camps that are making these arguments. And I think that it's important to have opinions on both sides, but we need to look a little bit more detailed at the situation before we can kind of just say it has to be one or it has to be the other. The course designers, they put out a message about how the hole was put together, and they were very clear that they wanted this hole to be very difficult. They wanted to bring back a more golf style mindset where players had to make choices, feel pressure, and execute great shots to be able to finish off the course. And they definitely tried to make 18 difficult. Really difficult. More difficult than anyone ever expected it to be. And I applaud them for wanting to take that stance, because I think that there's a lot of room in our sport for opportunities for very difficult holes. And anytime we can make people make decisions is always a good thing. But they also, in their statements, kind of walk back a little bit of what they did, because it was very clear they felt bad for how it made the FPO field feel. And so I don't know if we're going to see this whole design this way in the future. Only time is going to tell. Pretty much all of the arguments about this hole came down to one singular shot on the hole, and that was the upshot from the bottom of the steps to the green. There were comments all over the place that said that the throw was too far, that it was too hard, that the line was too tight, that it was too blind. They couldn't see where the hole was at. So I wanted to see if this really was the problematic shot on the hole. So I did a little bit of research. I broke down every single OB stroke that we saw for every FPO player across the first 2 rounds. And I found some interesting numbers. I'm going to put a picture on the screen here that shows hole 18, and then it has some sections that I've circled in different colors just to help clarify what I'm going to say here. But the green area that you can see on the picture here are OB represented by any drive landing out of bounds in this portion of the hole. And so in round 1, we saw 9 shots go OB off the tee. That's about 5.3% of the OB strokes. And in round 2, we saw another 9 shots go OB, representing 9% of the OB strokes on the hole. Next is the yellow area. These are the shots that went out of bounds from the actual second shot itself. It's a much smaller sample size here. In round 1, only 3 shots went out of bounds off of this particular throw. It's 4% of the OB strokes for the round on that hole. And then in round 2, 8 shots went OB in this particular area. Moving on to orange, because I want to do this in order of significance. Orange are shots that were made from the putting green that went OB. So these are shots that maybe went a little awry from the drop zone or longer portions of the green itself. In round 1, 5 shots went OB, 6.7% of the OB strokes, and in round 2, 6 shots went OB, which is 6%. But that leads us to the most consequential, controversial portion, which is the red area here. This represents any OB stroke made from the upshot from around the stair landing area to the green itself. In round 1, 64 shots went OB this way. That made up for 84% of the OB strokes on the hole that round. And in round 2, 77 total shots went OB, making up 77% of the OB strokes for that particular round. There were only 2 FPO competitors who avoided OB strokes altogether both rounds. Only 2. And that was Evelina Salonen and Henna Blumros, which props to them both. And they didn't even get away with pars or birdies in both rounds. Some of those were OB-free 6s because that's how you had to play the hole to be able to get through it unscathed. I've seen a lot of solutions being talked about by different people. Things like putting a 3rd drop zone at the top of the stairs for if you don't cross, you can play from up there. The course designers have talked about that not being as safe as people think it is. I've heard conversation about making the entire OB area around the green just a hazard. I still have a little bit of issue with that, especially with spectators. We'll talk about that in a moment. They've talked about having no OB in the shot, taking it back to the original hole that we saw for the USWDGC. I think that's a viable option. And they also talked about expanding the green. That might be a little harder than they think, but I think all of them are things to think about. But here's the thing. Ultimately, everyone's going to have their opinions on the hole. I think that the opinions from the FPO players themselves is incredibly valuable, but those aren't the only opinions that matter. I think we also have to care about things like fan enjoyment, because at the end of the day, yes, they're the athletes playing the course, but yes, this is also a product that needs to be consumed by the general public, and that's where a lot of money comes into the sport. So we need to also be entertaining for people to be able to watch. I think if we ask ourselves, is it fine to talk about course design, suggest changes, and talk about things that don't really feel right? Yeah, that's really, really important. Is it okay to ask pros to perform the best they possibly can and talk about it when they don't? Yes, I think that's totally fine as well. So here's my opinion on the whole thing. And I'm going to try to keep it brief. I could probably talk about this for 30 minutes on its own, maybe even longer. And you could be sitting there right now going, you've already talked about it for forever. Move on, please. I just want to share my thoughts on it. I think we're going to be talking about this hole and referencing this hole for a while. This is important to really dive into it. When it comes to the design of the hole itself, I like course design that forces decisions onto people. I want the best players in the world, which is what we're referencing we have here in this field. I want them to have to work hard. I want them to have to make good shots and score well to have a successful round. And I think that easy courses have their place on tour, like we talked about, with Waco. I think having a course like that definitely has its spot, but difficulty also needs to be a factor. Requiring more of pros is okay. Asking them to have more touch on their shots is okay. Now, here's the thing. I don't like that hole 18 caused 5-card backups. That's a real problem. That's a significant logistics issue that needs to be figured out. How can they make course flow better to avoid all those backups? Because there's nothing worse than sitting for 20 or 30 minutes before you have to play the hardest hole you've ever played before. That's not really fair to ask professionals to do. I think it's also important to take players out of their comfort zone on a hole. And that clearly, hole 18 took players out of their comfort zone. We saw players getting consoled by their caddies after shots because of just the stress this hole put on them. I don't like having the most optimal play be to throw it out of the back of the island green to make it to a drop zone. And that leads me into my talk about the logistics of the hole itself. They're putting fans all around the green. So when you're encouraging players, like saying, hey, the shot you should actually be trying is just throw it out the back of the green and then you get to advance the drop zone. By the way, we put spectators there and they can't see you when you're throwing because you're 7 feet below the level that they're on. I don't like that. I think logistically that's unsafe. Someone could very well get hurt, and they need to think about that in a way that I think makes a little bit more sense. Also, there were some issues with the scorekeepers. When I looked at every single OB stroke, there were a number of times where the scorekeeper clearly couldn't figure out whether or not the player was advancing to the drop zone or advancing to circle 2. Technically, the drop zone was in circle 2, but that inconsistency, it really wreaks havoc for us who are trying to do the stats. But I know that asking a bunch of scorekeepers to just suddenly get better, it's difficult. I've been there. I've kept score for a Pro Tour event. It's a lot harder than people realize it is. And if you're not really super invested in what's going on, it's easy to mess up putting something into the live scoring. But that proved to be a difficult thing for them as well. One thing logistically I'll say is a good idea is that they had a marshal on the hole who was the person making the call whether or not shots made it over the island enough to go to the drop zone, which I think is a really good idea because with a marshal there, it's kind of an end-all be-all. You're not relying on volunteer spotters to make a very intense judgment call. So good on them for thinking ahead to have an actual marshal on hole 18. Now I'll give them credit for that one. Now I want to say, in relation to the FPO field, I have always been a big advocate for the FPO and the European field. I think that they're two markets that we need to see expand. We need to put more time into thinking about how we make them more marketable for everybody else. I'm a huge fan of the FPO. I watch all the FPO coverage and content just as much as I do the MPO. I think there's a lot of value in it. And anyone who's ever watched me on debate night over on the Foundation stuff, or has seen me when I have appeared on Tour Life a couple times, I really want to see FPO succeed. However, I will admit it is hard to see the FPO field just simply unwilling to admit that they are part of the problem on this hole. Now, like I said, there are things about the way the hole's designed I don't agree with. There are things about the hole design that I like. Do I think that FPO players having an opinion is important? Absolutely. But what we didn't see a lot of were any FPO players willing to also say, hey, we could have done a better job practicing, preparing, doing all that stuff. And I gotta say, props goes out to Kristen, because she did not get in there and blame hole design or anything like that. She basically said on her wrap-up post after the event that she made the mistakes and that she's the one who has to go to the drawing board and get better at it. And I have a lot of respect for that, because it would be very easy to hide behind the complaints that every single other FPO player was making. And I talked to a couple FPO players who played the event, and when they described their perspective of the hole, they oftentimes described it in a way that was not very accurate to what the hole demanded. And so I wonder if just with everyone saying so many bad things about the hole, it's just been very, very easy to say, hey, I don't like it, and it's the hole's fault. And there's been no real accountability for what their jobs are as professionals, as the best in the sport, to go out and play as well as they can. I mean, another prime example of this is if you watch the Jomez coverage, they're just trashing the hole with the commentary. And you can see that Kristen is struggling when they show her in the shot she's making. But guess what? Every shot Kristen threw to try to make it to that green, except for the one that finally got her there, they were bad shots. Like they were not Kristen level shots. They were way too high. They were sawed off. And then when she went to the drop zone, she completely fluffed the putt out of bounds. So to sit there and suggest that it's completely the hole's fault, and we can't be accountable for the players. You watch the second round and you see someone like Sarah Hokum, who I love. Sarah Hokum, one of the nicest people I've ever met on the tour, but she threw terrible shots to make it onto that green. And around them, we see that Evelina and Rebecca Cox get the birdie. So like they're really only focusing on the bad parts of the hole, and they're saying, yay, these people got birdies, without acknowledging that, hey, the shots that are causing these big scores and blow-ups, they're bad shots. They should be better. We should be seeing better things from the top of the FPO field. The other thing that was really confusing to me is they kept alluding to this idea that shots within 15 feet or near the bullseye should always be safe and in bounds. And I think that's just it's not the way the hole was designed. The hole was telling you have to be deep in the basket. Don't be afraid to throw far. And this idea that you have to put something up there and land it under the basket is just not a reality. This idea that you always have to be there. One of the things that I talk about, that I've talked with people on the course for me, is when I approach a hole when I play, and I know I'm not a pro by any means, but I think this is a valuable lesson that I've heard from pros and I've taken from pros, is that the idea that you have to park every basket tends to get you into a lot of trouble. Sometimes the hole is really telling you, hey, there's this perfectly acceptable safe landing zone 15 to 20 feet right of the basket. And so trust yourself to make a putt and land there, because if you try to land it under the basket, you're bringing in a lot of trouble. I think that's what happened here, was where so many players were trying to throw these like touchy shots to land under the basket and not just going, you know what, I only need to land 20 feet behind the basket, so let's go for that instead. But yeah, every single blow up score that we watched on coverage, horrible shots. I didn't see anybody blow up and throw nothing but good shots. That's not something that we saw. So I think there has to be some accountability for that. And I have to ask myself, at what point can we talk about like the preparation? They had access to the course, obviously. They were down there. They knew the rules for the hole. They were able to go out, practice the shot. I mean, at what point, like I said, and I know I'm beating a dead horse at this point, we can talk critically about the hole, but we should also be able to talk critically about the play. And the issue is somewhere in the middle, and it involves both those things. And the last thing I'll say about this is I know that the common response to a lot of these types of statements would be that, how about you go do it? Or I don't see you on tour. Or, I bet they would absolutely crush you. I don't like those types of responses because, and I've expressed that before on here about certain things. I may not have the skills to be a pro on the pro tour or whatever, but I do have enough understanding of common sense and course design to know that this hole, if you just played the averages, you would have ended up in a really, really great position. And there were just too many people who didn't understand that this hole was begging to be bogeyed. Had players come out and just played it super duper safe, taking bogeys, who knows? Imagine what happens if Kristen goes out and she just settles for sevens both rounds. That's 7 strokes she gets back. So I think we just have to talk about that stuff. But I'm not going to labor on this any longer. There's a lot of opinions out there. And I'm just worried, and the reason I wanted to vocalize my opinion here is I'm just worried that we're continually enabling the FPO field to just justify poor preparation, poor course management, and that we're creating a cycle where the sport doesn't grow because it's just too easy to blame course design, when sometimes half the problem is we're not asking more of the quote-unquote best in the world. I'll finish my point on this by saying that it can be just as entertaining to watch players struggle as it is to watch them succeed. And if you want a really interesting perspective on the whole, one that I actually largely align with, and this isn't because I've done stuff with Foundation before, I've listened to probably 100 different opinions on the whole so far. I really align with a lot of the conversation that happened on this past week's episode of Tour Life, where Paul Ulibarri, you got Brody Smith, and they brought in Missy Gannon to talk about the whole and discuss the pros, the cons, the ups, the downs. And it was a really productive conversation about where the FPO field is at and course design. And I would encourage you to go check that out. In fact, I think they made a smaller video of just that particular segment for this particular purpose. So I would go check that out. All right, you survived this far. Let's talk about Harvey Penick, the other course that's there. This was probably a breath of fresh air to the FPO field and was pretty much business as usual for the MPO field. When you look at the averages for this course, you need to take the cut into account, because there was a cut that happened from round 3 and round 4, which means that only the top better playing half of the time played round 4. Looking at the averages, it definitely looks like the course got super duper easy in round 4. It's because a lot of players who weren't playing as well were cut out of the field. So in round 3 for the FPO, the course averaged 3.21 strokes over par and averaged 0.05 strokes under par in round 4 with the cut. Funny enough, for the MPO in round 3, they averaged 0.05 strokes under par, and then after the cut, they averaged 4.21 strokes under par. And both averages are improvements on last season for both fields, which is really, really interesting. So here at Harvey Penick, we saw a good combination of open and wooded holes. There were elevation changes, and there was demanding angle control. There was some wind going on, which is very typical for Texas, as we all know. And hole 18, once again, was a significant feature for the course, being a really, really solid finisher for the event, requiring angle control off the tee through a narrow, low ceiling type of hallway. And there was an optimal landing zone in the middle and a slightly guarded green with some trees and some spots that made that shot a little more cerebral. You had to think a little bit about your angle control and placement. I think hole 18 at Harvey Penick was a great finishing hole. And maybe the course played easier for everybody, because after the controversy with Sprinkle Valley, this course almost felt boring and easy in comparison, despite being a very good test of multiple skill levels. And one big notable thing I have to say is Gavin Phillips got a second ace for the tournament on hole 15. So mad props to 2 aces in one event is just phenomenal. So big props to Gavin Phillips on that one. When we look at the results of the event, we've beaten the courses to death. I want to talk about the results. So this is our first event that we've seen with a cut. I love cuts. I think it's helpful to the field. I think it makes things play better and smoother on the final day. And there are surprising names that didn't make the cut. One of them being for the FPO is Emily Weatherman. I've expected more out of her this season. She missed the cut. You got Joseph Anderson, a.k.a. Joey Buckets. He missed the cut. The MVP squad missed the cut. That's Simon Eagle and Coling. That's a pretty big deal. Simon and Eagle missing the cut, especially with Eagle taking off of Waco to get some more time in preparation for the Open at Austin. So strange to see them not make it. And there was just a bunch of other very talented MPO players who didn't make the cut. And I think we're seeing the field just start to get really deep. And I love it. I love that players who 3-4 years ago felt like they never had to worry about missing the cut have that pressure on them now, because the field is getting stronger. So looking at the FPO, coming into the third round, you got Holland and Kristen, who are sitting at 5 and 7 over respectively. Kristen had a very respectable 4 under round, climbing herself into second place, which is not bad for using 21 strokes to play one hole twice in rounds 1 and 2. And Holland, she actually shot the hot round at 8 under and catapulted herself to a 6-stroke lead over Kristen and the field to go into the final round. And she did that by going 9 for 9 on birdies to close out the round, which should inspire incredible confidence going into the final day. And in round 4, she kept that going by carding 3 birdies in the first 5 holes compared to Kristen's 1 under for that same stretch. And that's where, unfortunately, the Holland that we're kind of used to seeing came out for a little bit. 6 different times last year, Holland led the field going into the final round. 6 times she blew that lead. So closing out events has not really been her strong suit. She proceeded over the next several holes to give up 6 total strokes to Kristen, bringing the lead down to just 1. And this started a bit of a back and forth game between Kristen and Holland, where they both were trying to give each other opportunities to run away with it. And despite all of that, Holland was able to keep it together long enough to win the event by 1 stroke. Kristen had a nice long putt to be able to force some kind of a playoff, but she just couldn't hit it. And so, looking at our predictions from last week, we had Own in 3rd place. That actually happened. She scorched the course with a hot round of 7 under, so we got that one right. I had Kristen at winning the event. She came in 2nd, so pretty close there. And I put Missy in 2nd place as a prediction, and unfortunately, she was nowhere to be found, finishing down in 23rd. I'm going to start putting Missy on the players to watch, because that's 3 events in a row that I would have expected some better finishes from her, and she just hasn't been there. But knowing her, she usually heats herself up, and I've heard a lot of people say that there hasn't been enough money on the line, because when the purse for the event gets big enough, then Big Money Missy comes out to play, and everyone basically has to hide their money. But I said in the end, Holland ended up winning, and she did so by leading the field in a 40% birdie rate, 82% fairways hit, 11% parked rate, which, by the way, super duper low for an event. That's pretty crazy. She had a 44% C1 in regulation and 63% C2 in regulation. Honestly, I think it was a really impressive event for Holland, minus some small hiccups, and I would love to see this catapult her into future success this season. For the MPO field, out of the gate, Kyle Klein was poised to win this event. He was tied for first after the first round, shooting 12 down. Then he opened a 4-stroke lead after round 2, and then he held on to a 3-stroke lead going into the final round. But I have to stop for a moment and talk about what that 3rd round looked like, because there are just certain stats that we can't really ignore, and for all intents and purposes, his round was pretty mediocre, but he started the round with 8 consecutive pars, and he still came out of the round with a 3-stroke lead. I know I keep saying it, but that's crazy. This event was something else. But he looked extremely out of sorts on the putting green. He just seemed very out of touch with his game, and I'll give him credit. Like Kristen admitting that it wasn't the course, it was her, Kyle said it out in the aftermath that he just felt like things weren't clicking for him. He didn't blame the course, he didn't claim bad breaks, he basically said, hey, I don't know what was going on with me, and I got to figure it out. And a lot of props to players who are willing to sort of take that introspective look on themselves and challenge themselves to be better next time. But it's crazy, because he led the entire field with a par percentage of 72% in round 3. I think the only reason that he didn't lose the lead is that he stayed bogey free, and he knocked down some birdies in the back 9 of the course, which really helped him out and built some confidence. Also, it's very possible that nobody else was able to score that round, because Paul McBeth was stealing everybody's mojo on his way to shooting a 12 under round 3. Which just McBeast mode came out for a round. It was really fun to see him scoring so well. That was pretty cool. Now, going into round 4, Kyle still tried to repeat his round 3 performance. He was only 1 under through the first 9 holes, but all of his success came in the back 9 when he was 6 under through the last 9 holes. And while this was enough for him to keep the lead in round 3, it was not going to be enough here, because Gannon and Nicholas, they were surging big time. By the end of hole 13, we now had a 3-way tie at the top of the field. And then an errant bogey on hole 14 would put Gannon 1 stroke behind Kyle and Nicholas. So it became a nail-biter on every single hole with what was going to happen. And with hole 18 coming up, we knew that there was going to be a hole with a little bit of score separation to finish things off. So going into that hole, Nicholas throws probably the best turnover mid putter in disc golf right now. I know we heard a lot about that on the coverage, but it's just beautiful. When it's on, it is one of the best shots that you're ever going to see. And he put it in prime position off the tee. Kyle ended up leaking his shot a little bit, and it was way shorter than he wanted to. But fortunately for him, Nicholas kind of flubbed his upshot a little bit, and they both ended up carding a par. I can't move on without mentioning that Gannon tried to make it a ball game by throwing maybe the most impressive tee shot anyone has ever thrown on hole 18 at Harvey Penick. He like turned the cameraman by like 70 feet. It was just unbelievable, and he put himself in a position where he was able to like jump putt for eagle. It was just nuts. Gannon's talent is absurd to even think about sometimes. But so both Niklas and Kyle, they tied, which meant it's playoff time. Really interesting thing, Niklas won the coin toss and he deferred to Kyle. He decided to, give Kyle the chance to put the pedal to the metal, and maybe that was a really strategic play because he saw that Kyle had struggled with the drive on hole 18, and by putting him there first, it kind of puts him in a bit more pressure. I don't know. Very, very interesting to see that happen. But so Kyle went first, and it kind of worked because he ended up hitting stuff early and being shorter than he was in even the first time playing 18, not but a few minutes ago. And then Niklas threw an even better tee shot, putting him in the primest of positions to birdie the hole. So Kyle gets his shot to about 45 feet, and he just can't convert the putt. I mean, he was 2 for 12 from C2 at Harvey Penick across both rounds, and I think we're going to be seeing him putting some serious work into the putting green in these off weeks here. But Niklas goes on and he hits his putt, becoming the 2-time finish cowboy by clawing back with a 12 under par round, which just so much ferocity in his play. The touch he had on the rollers that he threw, the shots he threw. It was his event, and it kind of felt like just at the end, everything made sense for him to be the winner. As for my picks, I didn't do so well on this one. Last week, I thought Evan Smith. I called him out for third place. He finished in 22nd. I put Gannon in second place. He ended up taking third, so we were close on that one. And I actually said Calvin was going to win. He took 10th. So not the best picks on our end, but, hey, that does it for the Texas Swing. In 2 weeks, we're going to be going over to the Music City Open, which we know that event belongs to Simon Lizotte, so I'll be curious to see if anyone could take him down there. Moving on, let's take a quick look at some season stats. I think it's important to know kind of where we're at after the Texas Swing and a few events. So let's look at some of the season leaders and in points and standings, as well as some stats. So with the Open at Austin being an Elite Plus event, it is worth more points than a typical standard event. And if we look at the current standings for the FPO players, you'll see that Holland has taken a lead by getting all 200 points for this event, and has opened up a decent lead over the person behind her with Ella Hansen. You got Owen Scoggins, you got Kristen back there, who's in fourth with only playing 2 events. It's definitely early on in the season, but it's exciting to see what the scoreboard looks like for DGPT points so far. And looking at the FPO, it's really no surprise seeing who's up top there. You've got Adam Hammis, who already won an event this year. You got Ezra Robinson second, who already won an event this year. You got Kyle Klein in fourth. You got Anthony Burrell in third, so they're up there. Some good consistent play so far. A little bit tighter over on the MPO side. So, like I said, it's going to be really kind of fun to watch how these change throughout the year. So let's look at the stat lines to finish off this where everyone's standing at right now. And just a quick reminder of how this is figured out. To be listed on the list and be ranked, you have to have completed at least 40% of the available holes played by the pros so far on tour. So just to give you some context there. The current queen of birdies is Holland Handley at 38.9% birdie rate for the season. Close behind her, you've got Kristen at 36.1% and Silva Saarinen sticking in at 34.6%. Over on the men's side, the supposed king of birdies actually is we three kings of birdies, as there is a 3-way tie at 51.7% between Ezra Robinson, Adam Hammis, and Paul McBeth, which makes complete sense considering that 2 of them have already won an event this year, and Paul has put himself in the hunt at every event this year so far. Leading the ladies in putting, you got Deanne Carey at 90.6% in C1X, leading the field with 7% ahead of the next closest person. When you look at C2, you've got Paige Pierce, who's leading the field at 31.1% for C2. And also followed close behind her is Silva once again at 30.2%. Now, if you know anything about MPO putting statistics, you know who is very likely going to be the name at the top of the MPO C1X putting percentage list. Yep, no surprise, it's Andrew Marweed, sitting at 95.9% from C1X. Crazy. But from downtown in C2, we find Ty Love leading the field at 46.2%. And close behind him are Ezra Aderhold at 44.7%. And Jake Mon, better keep your eye on him this year, at 44.6%. Next week, we're going to take a deeper dive into some stats and talk about the field coming out of the Texas swing. I'm working on something special right now for all of you out there. Some stats that nobody else out there is tracking, not something that Statman is picking up or some of the other names. I'm working really hard to get them for you. Gathering these is difficult because these stats just aren't available for download, and they don't make them easy to copy and paste or anything like that. There's really only a few of us in the sport of disc golf right now who are willing to grind to get these stats, and it's a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of time and it's not easy. So I'm really excited to show you guys what I find. I think you're going to find it very interesting. We're going to talk about things like momentum stats, drop-off rates. We're going to see how well people do after they take bogeys, after they take birdies. It's going to be really interesting. So make sure you tune in next week to see that. To finish off today's episode, we're going to take a real brief look at the Go Throw Tour stop number 2 happening at Persimmon Ridge. So this is going to be a pretty cool one because we've seen this course a lot before on coverage. They have events there every single year. There's $10,000 being added to the cash for the payouts for this event. It's pretty neat. The course itself is located in Greenbrier, Arkansas. It's about a 10,000 foot plus track. You got elevation changes, you got water carries. And like I said, we've seen this course covered before. Last year, they ran an event during the eclipse, which was really, really cool. Jeremy Colling actually took that one down over a pretty stacked field of MPO players. Speaking of the field itself, the MPO has 52 players in it, and there are some notable attendees. You got people like Andrew Marweed, our putting current leader, Calvin Heimberg, Curl Wadallen, Gannon Burr, Jeremy Colling, guy won it last year, Luke Taylor, Robert Burridge, and then a bunch of other players whose names you would know if I read them. So it's a pretty good MPO field for a between tour event stop. So I'm excited to see what they're going to do. I love seeing so many big names come out to this because Persimmon Ridge is the number 12 course in the world for a reason, and it really should be a fun event to watch. Looking at the FPO field, unlike the MPO field, there's only going to be 9 competitors in it, and the only real names that you're going to recognize are people like Deanne Carey, Eliezer Midling, and Emily Weatherman, and Taylor Chosick. So I'm not really surprised to see this smaller attendance from the FPO field. I don't know that the FPO competitors have really bought into the Go Throw model yet. There was no actual coverage for the FPO for the Cancer Playbook Open 2 a few weeks ago. Even though they mentioned having it, it never really materialized. And so I think it's going to be really hard for FPO players to want to buy in and come out if they're not getting the chance to be on coverage, because that's ultimately how they get exposure, how they sell discs and merch. So not having that opportunity for them is going to be difficult to draw people for the FPO field. So I'll be curious to see how that plays out over the course of the year. It's definitely something we're going to be keeping track of. I think it should shape up, though, to be a really fun 2-round event. My predictions are that Emily Weatherman takes down the FPO. I think that possibly might give her the jump start she needs for the rest of her season. On the MPO side, I could see this being a really great battle, but I'm going to have to give it to Gannon. Maybe he's going to sweep all the Go Throw events. That'd be something kind of crazy to think about, but Calvin could certainly have something to say about that on his end. We know he's always capable of putting up some good scores. And hey, we can't discount Big Germ because he did win this event last year, so who knows what's going to happen, but it's going to be a fun time. But thank you so much. That's going to wrap it up for this week's episode. Next week, we're going to dive deeper into the players that, we've seen on tour to see what the first 3 events can tell us about what we can expect for the rest of the year. But what is it that you guys want to hear about? Obviously, I'm sitting here droning on about course recaps and players and hole 18 at Sprinkle Valley. What do you want to know about? What are the things that you want to see us bring up in this the format? What stats do you want to know more about? What players do you want to know more about? What would you like to see? Let us know in the comments down below. That would be super, super helpful. Also, make sure to check out our other socials that are in the description. And don't forget to subscribe. It is the easiest way to help this channel grow. As you know, we're trying to do a little bit more every single video, trying to be a little bit better, a little more professional. And pretty soon, we're going to have some video to put on so that you're not just looking at me the whole time. You're going to be able to see some of the shots that I'm talking about. You're going to see the drone flyovers for the holes. I'm really excited to see where this is going to be developing for everybody. And I thank you, I thank you every single week for being here, for listening, and participating in this journey that we're going on together, because it's been a real trip so far. So until next time, have a wonderful rest of your week, and go watch some disc golf or go play some disc golf this weekend.